reactivating people like General Milley and also going against all of the generals who were on the ground in Kabul for that admittedly disastrous withdrawal. General McAfee, first to you. What is your posture towards court-martialing some of these generals, including 4-stars?
Well, I think legally it's going to go nowhere. There's just no precedent for this. You can bring back retired military personnel who committed a civil crime years ago while they were in active duty. But this is utter nonsense. What isn't utter nonsense is this is a political attack of utmost hypocrisy. Trump ran for office saying, get out of Afghanistan. He reduced the troop presence to 2,500. He negotiated directly with the Taliban. And Biden, in a legitimate political objective, came into office saying he was going to withdraw from Afghanistan. So there are 2,500 troops on the ground. We had to give up the major air base. We were in a bowl around Kabul. The evacuation from a tactical military viewpoint was a brilliant success. I thought it might be Dien Bien Phu. They put 7 battalions on the ground. U.S. Air Force appeared with B-52, B-1 bombers. We got out of there with 100,000 Afghan civilians fleeing with us. So it's just the world turned upside down. I think it's going nowhere, but it's a disaster signal to the armed forces. They're also talking about review boards, vetting the 3- and 4-star flag officers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, firing the chairman of the JCS, who I might add was promoted to 4 stars by Trump. This is a terrible beginning to an administration.
And John Brennan, there's also lots of reporting, including our own, that the military wanted to keep 2,500 troops there and not shut Bagram as precipitously as it was. And it was the political advisors and the national security advisors and the president himself who said, no, draw down.
Yeah, the U.S. military is one of the most esteemed and respected organizations, I think, worldwide. And it does follow the orders of the civilian leaders of this government. And so they were carrying out the orders. And it was pointed out, it was Donald Trump who first initiated this withdrawal by giving a date certain to the Taliban when U.S. military forces would leave. And U.S. military expressed their concerns. A number of people expressed their concerns. But in good military order, they saluted and they carried out the orders of the commander-in-chief. And they did it to the best of their ability in a very difficult and challenging environment. And so this would be blatant politicization of this civilian control over the U.S. military, which I think would have reverberations, negative reverberations for years to come.
John Brennan, of course, is a former Marine as well as former CIA director. Ashley Parker, there's another aspect of the military, which is what the president-elect has confirmed overnight, is that he wants to carry out what he said he was going to do, the mass deportation, and that means using the military. What about the ripple effects of that?
Well, again, he hasn't explained exactly how this would work, and deporting millions of people in the country is a task that is easier said and promised during a campaign than done. I would point you to his first term when during the campaign he promised what he called a Muslim ban. He came into office and tried to implement that, and what we saw was sort of chaos at the nation's airports and a system that was not ready to handle what he was trying to do. So again, we know that he talked about this on the campaign trail. He just overnight confirmed in a Truth Social post that, yes, he does plan to use the military at the southern border to begin mass deportations. But to know exactly how this would work and what the ramifications would be, we have to see how he actually implements it, which right now is still a bit unclear.
And when the reporters have tried to drill down on this in recent weeks, it's not just the people who have been adjudicated as having done, criminal acts. He's talking about, he's made clear all of them, which is potentially, 20 million people, and with a big impact on our economy, our agricultural and our manufacturing economy, where many of them work.
Right, that's right. There are the there are the impacts on the economy. There are the impacts on the communities. There's just the sheer logistical enormity of what he is proposing. You know, if you look at Project 2025, which was not his plan, but was something that a lot of things he had promised to do or was interested in doing and may use as a blueprint. There was also talk of, when it comes to mass deportations, going to these quote unquote safe spaces. So that would be churches, schools. There's going to be, forget about if he actually successfully carries this out, but even any attempt will just have reverberations and ramifications across the United States in any number of sectors.
And General McCaffrey, how would it work for the military to be involved in these domestic deportations?
Well, again, it's not going to happen. We're not going to round up 10 million. He alleges 20 million workers. Be devastating in agriculture, construction, restaurant industry. It's just not going to happen. And to use the armed forces as an internal police force, going door to door with armored vehicles in the streets, that's not going to happen either. I think the problem is we have a border policy that makes no sense. Trump actually did better. Biden came in, loosened his restrictions. We ended up with, who knows, 3 to 5 million more immigrants coming in illegally. It is a problem that has to be addressed by Congress and then rationally by the administration. But if there are deportations, it's the criminal justice system and law enforcement, not the armed forces, that should be involved in this.
General McCaffrey, thank you so much. Our thanks to Kelly O'Donnell. President-elect Trump is reportedly facing an internal battle over a critical appointment, the decision on who will be his Treasury Secretary, after Elon Musk posted his support for one of the contenders and against the others. This could become a big test of Elon Musk's influence with the president-elect. And joining us now is NBC correspondent Dasha Burns. Dasha, some of the contenders are headed to Mar-a-Lago this week. What more can you tell us about what's going on here? Because this is such a key post.
It's such a key post, and there has been so much jockeying for this post, Andrea. And like you said, some heavy hitters weighing in on this as well. Elon Musk putting this out on social media, actually posting on X that Scott Bessent, who's one of the contenders, has the more traditional Wall Street resume, posting that Bessent would be, quote, business as usual, whereas Howard Lutnick, the other contender for the job, saying that he will actually enact change. Now, Lutnick is cut out of the MAGA mold, much more so than Bessent. He's the sort of less conventional choice. Bessent, the more conventional. There are some others in the mix now. The New York Times and Wall Street Journal reporting Mark Rowan, another Wall Streeter, and Kevin Warsh, a former Federal Reserve governor, as two additional potential picks. All of this is in discussion actively at Mar-a-Lago with the transition team. But Andrea, the Musk of it all is a big factor here. Look, we reported recently that Elon Musk, since Election Day, has been wielding his influence at Mar-a-Lago. He's been at dinners, he's been in meetings, he's been at calls, he's traveling with President-elect Trump pretty much everywhere he goes. And there's been some consternation on the part of some inner circle members at Mar-a-Lago who feel that he's one source telling me he's acting as if he's co-president. Another telling me that he has an opinion on everything and anything and is perhaps overstepping in the view of some of Trump's staff. But it doesn't look like he's going anywhere anytime soon. And the way that he is publicly wielding his influence now only escalating, Andrea.
Well, I was just going to say, by actually posting in favor of Howard Lutnick, who is also powerful because he's the co-head of the transition team inside the Trump transition. So Lutnick has a lot to say about who has access, but several of these other possibilities have already been to Mar-a-Lago and have a lot of support on Wall Street and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There are factions now within Trump world, some supporting the more traditionally qualified candidates. And then you have those characters like Musk, like RFK Jr. as well. There's sort of this divide right now, Andrea, in Trump world, and we're seeing this playing out with the various contenders for just about every role that is still unnamed. We see the people that have a resume that would fit with the past people to hold that role. And then we have those outsiders, and we have both traditionalists and outsiders in the Trump circle right now. And that's where the butting heads is happening, Andrea.
Dasha Burns, thanks so much. We appreciate it. And joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who serves on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Murphy, Elon Musk and Donald Trump are spending a lot of time together. Over the weekend, we saw them at Madison Square Garden on the Trump plane. Are you concerned about conflicts of interest, potentially, about him having access to proprietary information of his competitors? He has $50 billion of government contracts, including critical ones, SpaceX, Starlink.
Yeah. Am I concerned about conflicts of interest?
Where do you start?
Yeah, right. I mean, listen, this entire White House is going to be one giant conflict of interest, right? If we haven't figured this out already, Donald Trump is running for president. Donald Trump wants to be president in order to make money for himself. Elon Musk wants to be close to Donald Trump to make money for himself. I don't know a lot about all of these candidates for the Department of Treasury, but they're all billionaires who have spent their entire careers just making money for themselves. None of them have spent any time thinking about the rest of us. None of them have spent any time trying to figure out how to improve working conditions, raise wages. All they have done is to work to depress wages, to depress working conditions so that they can become even richer. That's the last kind of person who should be running the Department of Treasury, but it seems like the competition is just between one billionaire versus another. None of them are going to care about the rest of us.
Well, I was just going to say that one of the potential players here is Kevin Marsh, who was a governor of the Fed and spent a lot of time worrying about, labor markets and all aspects of the economy, in addition to being, from some wealth. But that said, the Elon Musk factor, the factor of the lack of involvement in vetting of these potential conflicts, and there's been a lot of attention also on Matt Gaetz, as you know. Why do you think he's not qualified to lead the Justice Department?
Well, I think the selection of Gaetz is just a clear signal that the Department of Justice is going to be handed over to the White House to become a political arm of the White House. Matt Gaetz was Trump's chief lieutenant in defending the insurrection against the United States of America. That alone disqualifies him. But essentially, I think Trump is telling you that he's going to do exactly what he said he would do during the campaign. He is going to use the power of the White House. He is going to use the Department of Justice in order to punish his political enemies. Matt Gaetz said at one point that if the FBI and the ATF didn't get in line with Republican or conservative political priorities, they should be abolished. Gaetz and Trump both think that the Department of Justice is just supposed to be a political entity, whereby all the rest of us understand that the Department of Justice has to stand up for the rule of law, regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican. You should be protected in this country from persecution and prosecution, even if you are a political opponent of the president. I don't think that's the belief of Donald Trump, and I certainly don't believe that that is what Matt Gaetz thinks.
Now, as a consumer of intelligence, when you were briefed on the Hill, what is your view on Tulsi Gabbard, who has no experience in intelligence and would be in charge of editing the presidential daily brief and appointing the briefer?
Well, I just think we have to do a really thorough job of vetting Tulsi Gabbard and asking some very difficult questions. Obviously, we have all watched her toe the line of some brutal, despotic regimes, defending Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, engaging in secret diplomacy with Bashar al-Assad in the middle of his murderous rampage inside Syria. I just think we have to ask some real questions about Tulsi Gabbard's positions. That's why we, have to have hearings. That's why this commotion about recess appointments in which Trump would get some of his cabinet picks in place without hearings and confirmation votes is incredibly disturbing, because there are some really serious unanswered questions about his team, especially his national security team.
And the president's decision, President Biden's decision on the ATACMS, is this going to help Ukraine, at least at a potential negotiation with Vladimir Putin?
Well, I don't know what kind of negotiation there is going to be. My worry is that Donald Trump was telling the truth when he refused during the debate to say he wants Ukraine to win the war. It may be that Donald Trump wants Russia to win the war, and he is going to essentially hand Ukraine to Putin because he is going to refuse to continue to fund the war. There's no real negotiation if Russia knows Trump is cutting off military support for Ukraine. So I think what you're seeing is Biden trying to, put Ukraine in a position where it may have some additional leverage if it is forced to a negotiating table once Trump becomes president, and the ability to strike inside of Russia certainly is a different kind of leverage that they have not had.
And you've tweeted some really interesting thoughts about where Democrats have gone wrong. Where have Democrats gone wrong regarding the working people? People across this country who are worried about what they're going to do the next day. Not just inflation, but more broadly about their children and how they're treated by the so-called elites.
Yeah, listen, I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do think that we have to be much more transparent and purposeful in the way that we identify who has power, whether it be Wall Street, the billionaires, the drug companies, the insurance companies, and how we're going to take power from them and put it in the hands of regular people. I hate the fact that the Republican Party is seen among some constituencies as the more populist party. It isn't. When they get power, all they really do is just give more big tax breaks to billionaires. The harder thing Democrats have to do is have a conversation about whether we really want to be a big tent party or whether we want to continue to have a dozen litmus tests. Right now, people don't feel terribly welcome in our party if they don't line up with us on a whole host of social, cultural issues, other hot button topics like guns, climate. I think we've got to let people in who, have some diverse views, but who want to be part of a party that is actually going to stand up for working people, or actually going to take it to that billionaire and corporate class that's been screwing Americans. That's a hard conversation for Democrats to have, but I think we've got to be in the business of actively growing our coalition. Right now, our coalition is shrinking.
Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, thank you. Good day, everyone. I'm Andrea Mitchell in Washington. With just 9 weeks left before he leaves office, President Biden has authorized Ukraine to launch long-range missiles known as ATACMS at targets deeper inside Russia. Ukraine has been pleading for this approval for months. The president decided now, according to 2 U.S. officials, because Russia has deployed 10,000 North Korean troops to try to retake the Kursk region of Russia from Ukraine. President Biden reconfirming his commitment to Ukraine this morning at the G20 summit in Brazil.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well.
Over the weekend, Russia launched its largest attack in months, targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure and killing at least 11 civilians, including children, according to Ukrainian officials. The Kremlin now accusing the White House of, quote, adding fuel to the fire. Putin has previously said he would view any ATACMS strikes inside Russia as direct U.S. and NATO involvement. President-elect Trump has pledged to end the conflict within 24 hours. His choice for National Security Advisor, Congressman Mike Walls, weighing in this morning.
It's another step up the escalation ladder, and nobody knows where this is going. President Trump is talking grand strategy here. How do we get both sides to the table to end this war? What's the framework for a deal? And who's sitting at that table?
All this amid exclusive NBC News reporting that the Trump transition team is considering possible court-martial of U.S. military officers involved in the Afghanistan withdrawal, including former Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley. We begin today with NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell traveling with the president, Washington Post senior national political correspondent Ashley Parker, retired four-star general and former Gulf War Division commander General Barry McCaffrey, and former CIA Director John Brennan. So, Kelly, first to you. President Biden is there in Rio, where you are, in Rio de Janeiro, for the G20, which Russia is also part of. How is this major policy shift of ATACMS playing there? Foreign Minister Lavrov is there.
He is there and and was in the room when President Biden made his remarks earlier today. You played a clip of that where he gave his full-throated endorsement for ongoing support for Ukraine. We've talked with senior White House officials here today while the president is a part of these important meetings that will be his final international summit. And while they are not directly confirming the approval of the use of these ATACMS inside Russia for limited purposes, they are speaking broadly about the approach and pointing out that while the Kremlin has said this is an act that adds fuel to the fire, they say that Russia has accelerated the conflict by bringing in thousands of North Korean troops and by ramping up some of its own strikes, as you also indicated at the top of the program, with intensifying the fight. And so by doing that, by bringing foreign fighters into the sovereign territory of Russia to engage with Ukraine, they say that is an escalation, and that the U.S. had always said to Russia and made clear that that kind of an act would be viewed as something worthy of a response. Now, they did not specifically say this decision on changing the use of American weapons is that response, but that could be part of the context of what's playing out here, and people can infer until such time that the president talks about it openly or other officials do. So it is clearly something where the president wants to show support. We also expect there will be an additional drawdown under presidential authority for additional support for Ukraine. And part of what the president's been trying to do on the world stage here, and again, notably with Sergei Lavrov in the room, with President Xi of China in the room, trying to talk about the importance of supporting Ukraine. The president says quite openly that his time is limited on the world stage, and he's trying to fortify these relationships and U.S. priorities in his remaining time. Andrea?
And General McCaffrey, is it too late now? It's almost 1,000 days since the invasion. Is it too late to make a difference here, as Ukraine has really lost considerable leverage in the last couple of months, and Russia launched, major strikes against Iranian infrastructure and energy supplies over the weekend?
Well, look, the situation's grim for the Ukrainians. They're fighting literally for their survival against a mass Russian criminal offensive. The Russians are targeting civilian infrastructure. They're using DPICM munitions against civilian targets. They brought in what could turn out to be 100,000 North Koreans eventually. They're using Iranian-produced drones. China's giving them some minimal support. So it's a very difficult situation. I think you could argue that the Biden administration, in its closing hours, is adding one small factor that might help in the negotiations to end the war when the Trump administration comes in. And it's also responding, obviously, to the hypocrisy of the Russians. But as you suggest, even though ATACMS is a ferociously effective weapon, a 300-kilometer range, it can start now targeting Russian attack helicopter positions, fixed-wing aircraft, artillery that are attacking Ukraine. Even though it has military value, it's too little, too late.
And John Brennan, let's talk about North Korea and the resources there. North Korea could provide, as Barry McCaffrey just said, endless supplies of personnel to back up Russia.
Well, they've already supplied a fair amount of munitions and weapon systems to Russia since Russian stocks have run short. But it's these troops now, 10,000 supposedly have been amassed to launched this counteroffensive in the Kursk region, and many more tens of thousands could in fact show up afterward. So I do think the Biden administration is trying to help the Ukrainians blunt this counteroffensive so that the Ukrainians can hold on to some of this Russian territory in Kursk. Because if there's going to eventually be some type of negotiations, I think the Ukrainians have always hoped that there would be a trade of land for land, so they could agree to get out of the Kursk region if Russia agreed to get out of the eastern portion of Ukraine that they've occupied. But I do think it's a last-ditch effort on the part of the Biden administration to do what they can to be able to provide Ukraine some additional capability where they can strike troop concentrations, weapons depots, munition arsenals, and other areas inside of Russia. And it is rather rich, and as General McCaffrey said, rather the height of hypocrisy that Russia claims that this is an escalation, while Russia has been escalating this war over the last 2+ years.
And John Brennan and General McCaffrey, before we move on, I also want to ask both of you about NBC News' Courtney Kuby reporting over the weekend and her team that the new transition team is considering courts-martial and reactivating people like General Milley and also going against all of the generals who are on the ground in Kabul for that admittedly disastrous withdrawal. General McCaffrey, first to you. What is your posture towards court-martialing some of these generals, including 4-stars?
Well, I think legally it's going to go nowhere. There's just no precedent for this. You can bring back retired military personnel who committed a civil crime years ago while they were in active duty. But this is utter nonsense. What isn't utter nonsense is this is a political attack of utmost hypocrisy. Trump ran for office saying, get out of Afghanistan.
The Biden administration is still waiting for Donald Trump's transition team to sign key agreements critical to the transfer of control over the nation's sprawling number of federal agencies, including a key provision from the Presidential Transition Act that governs the security clearance process for national security and transition officials. An amendment to the act signed into law by Trump himself when he was president. Joining me now is Brendan Buck, former communications advisor to then Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner, and MSNBC political analyst. And back with us is John Brennan, former CIA director in the Obama administration, and an MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. So, Director Brennan, Team Trump's failure to sign these agreements is a big departure. Usually it's done months in advance by the candidates, not just the president-elect. The typical process has the FBI looking at some of these people before they are even named. What do you see as what's going on here behind the scenes, and what are the security risks? They've already faced some embarrassment with Pete Hegseth. They weren't aware of his prior problem that he's now addressing with, a charge that wasn't pursued against him involving a sexual encounter.
Well, Andrea, there is a wide array of programs on the international front. There are diplomatic, intelligence, and military programs that will go and continue from one administration to the next. And you need to make sure there's going to be continuity there, because most of the senior-most officials of the Biden administration will leave government on Inauguration Day. And so you need to be able to ensure that the individuals who are going to be in charge of those programs in the future are going to have some time to prepare to take over those reins of responsibility, which requires getting those security clearances, getting the opportunity to get read in, get briefed on these programs. Same thing is true on the domestic front in terms of law enforcement. So you want to make sure that the incoming administration has as much time as possible, as well as the ability to understand these programs, so that there will not be any slip between one administration and another. I was involved in the transition from the Bush administration to Obama administration, and it was seamless in terms of what the Bush administration did to facilitate the arrival of the new incoming Obama administration. In the Obama administration, we tried to prepare the incoming Trump administration, but I must say they were reluctant in terms of being willing to engage in these types of discussions and briefings that were necessary. So it appears as though this is just a repeat performance of the 2016-17 challenge.
And Brendan Buck, I'm personally aware of several meetings that were scheduled with Mike Flynn that didn't take place when he was supposed to be National Security Advisor, a tabletop exercise on a particular day that they did not fully engage in. There was a real reluctance there, but at least there were FBI interviews with people before they were nominated. That's going to happen, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, at least 8 years ago, Donald Trump came in here with some recognition that he didn't know a lot about how this works, and there was actually a lot of deference to others. This time, of course, you have a president who is not just confident about his ability to do this job, but bordering on arrogant. There are people all around him who know exactly what they think they want to do right when they come in, and frankly, I don't think they're terribly interested in getting briefed on a number of things. A big part of their philosophy is that the people in the government are out to get them and are out to stop their plans. So it's not surprising to me that they don't care too much about that. Of course, there are real national security implications for these things, and there's a reason why we have these processes and these systems. And it may just simply be, one, they don't care, but also they don't